Should you buy an M4 iPad Pro or a MacBook Pro? Surely you've heard or even asked this question before, and for such a simple question, it has sparked much debate over the years, leading to an inconclusive answer. Still, there have been answers boiling down to, well, if you have more money and want more of a laptop-like experience, just buy a MacBook Pro, and if you're more on a budget and can settle with a tablet experience, well, then buy the iPad Pro. And while you may be tempted to think that logic makes sense, this year, you would be wrong. That's because for the first time in a long time, the iPad Pro and MacBook Pro have more differences than just their form factor suggests. And while every YouTuber out there won't give the iPad Pro a fair shot, we're not talking about your average YouTuber here. We're talking about a depressed YouTuber who's had years of downturns and struggles, someone so close to the brink that they're tempted to tear down the previously conceived notions of space and time to determine which computer is the best and most forward-looking device. So today, I'm going to put an end to that debate on which product you should buy, iPad Pro or MacBook Pro. Let's have at it. While it seems like Apple products have been following the same design philosophy since the return of Steve Jobs, there's a pretty recent shift in that overall design strategy, and we have seen Apple shift away from focusing on super thin designs and shipping more practical designs that are thicker and sturdier and able to handle more power and deliver better battery life. That was the whole premise around the redesign of the 2021 M1 MacBook Pro, and that design regression or progression, depending on however you look at it, was met with praise and rave reviews. And it wasn't just MacBooks. We saw iPhones get thicker, Apple Watches get thicker, and even iPads start to get thicker than the device that preceded it. That is until the M4 iPad Pro flipped that thinking back onto its head. You might be wondering why Apple would pursue such a thin design, especially after the string of controversies it faced with easily bendable device. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna bend it. I'm not gonna bend my iPad Pro. While never one fearful to tackle criticism, Apple made improvements to the overall structural integrity of the iPad Pro, making it even more bend resistant than the previous model, despite it being thinner. I know it's more bend resistant. I'm still not gonna try and bend this thing. I'm not gonna bend it. This makes the iPad Pro feel paper thin in the hands, and that added with the weight reduced from shaving off all that extra aluminum, I guess, gives the iPad Pro a stunning 15% weight reduction. In fact, it's almost 90% less weight than a MacBook Pro, meaning you could stack 3 of these iPad Pros on top of each other to get about the same weight as this single MacBook Pro. Now, the MacBook Pro, on the other hand, is thicker than its older model. And by the older model, I mean the 2020 model. And it weighs more too. It looks more traditional, and that is to say boring. I mean, just to highlight how thin the iPad Pro is, it is just a hair thicker than the entire lid on the MacBook Pro. However, you know me, I'm a fair guy, and I think comparing both of these devices, it's only fair we add on Apple's Magic Keyboard accessory to the equation. This keyboard also received a redesign, now with aluminum palm rests and a bigger trackpad, making it feel more premium and honestly, more MacBook-like than ever before. But it also adds weight. And even without any memory or storage, a processor, or a battery, this keyboard still somehow weighs more than the iPad Pro. Still, even bundled together, this is overall lighter than a MacBook Pro, and even with all the added thickness, the overall package is still thinner than the MacBook Pro. And there's no way around it. The iPad Pro looks cutting edge and futuristic. It has a much more forward-looking design than this. But then there's the port situation. I mean, it's literally a port situation on the iPad Pro because without the Magic Keyboard case, it only has one Thunderbolt 4 USB-C port. That means if you need to charge this device and plug in an external drive at the same time, well, you're out of luck. If you're a Magic Keyboard user, well, that does net you another USB-C port on the side of the keyboard, but that port can only be used to charge the iPad Pro, so you're still left with only one data connection on the side of the iPad Pro. The M4 MacBook Pro, on the other hand, well, it is better than ever before, and it also makes this comparison the most unfair that I have ever done, because the M4 model now has the same Thunderbolt 4 ports, but 3 of them instead of 1 of them. And on top of that, it also packs an HDMI port, an SD card slot, magnetic charging port, and even a 3.5mm headphone jack. You can plug in good old-fashioned wired headphones directly into the MacBook Pro. You can't do that on the iPad Pro. Still, both of these products miss out on things like USB-A ports and an Ethernet port, and just lack multi-use ports, which is why if you need a few more ports for any of your devices, you need to check out Anker's 563 docking station, which provides an additional 10 ports with just one USB-C connection. And just like that, my MacBook Pro now has 3 USB-A ports, 2 additional HDMI ports, a display port, another headphone jack, and you still get to keep a 5 gigabits per second USB-C port, and it's still capable of delivering 30 watts of power, as well as a full wired gigabit Ethernet port that is so useful for stationary setups like this because Ethernet is so much faster and more reliable than relying on a flaky Wi-Fi connection. And yes, the crazy part is you can even connect this to the iPad Pro to get full Ethernet connections and access to ports that have never natively been available on my iPad before, letting me easily connect a wide array of accessories like a USB-A thumb drive directly to my iPad, which makes transferring files so much easier. Anker's docking station also solves a pain point many modern-day laptops have, and that is the inability to connect to multiple monitors, and the flexibility of monitor options I can have on my MacBook Pro with support for multiple HDMI connections and the popular DisplayPort option. This feature is especially useful for older M1 or M2 MacBooks, which are limited to just one external monitor. With the Anker 563, I can bypass this limitation and connect 3 full external monitors, and it also makes connecting these monitors so much easier for me because I can just connect this to the dock with one cable anytime I remove it from my desk. And Anker's 563 USB-C docking station also looks great on my desk with a slim and sleek design that matches the aesthetic of my Apple devices. To get your own Anker 563 USB-C docking station, click the link in the description below, and thank you to Anker for sponsoring this video. Surely there is one area where buying a dedicated MacBook Pro is going to net you an advantage with its beautiful 14-inch Super Retina XDR display that can now get up to 1000 nits of full screen brightness and up to 1600 nits of peak brightness for HDR video. It also has a fast 120Hz ProMotion display, making animations and scrolling appear super smooth, and that means it can even moonlight as a little nice display for high frame rate games. Yes, you can play games on a MacBook Pro. It is an impressive display and perhaps one of the most advanced displays Apple has ever made. That is until you take a look at the iPad Pro's display. I mean, the iPad Pro takes all those features I just rattled off about the MacBook Pro and doubles them, literally. The iPad Pro uses not one, but 2 OLED displays simultaneously to create what Apple calls a tandem OLED display. These 2 displays eliminate the traditional downside of using larger OLED panels, which typically result in much lower brightness levels. The 2 OLED displays work together to give you the same brightness rating as Apple's larger LCD display. In fact, it is the same brightness rating found on the MacBook Pro, but at the same time, it also gives you all the benefits of an OLED display, which means it can turn off and on each individual pixel rather than relying on a separate LED backlight, resulting in an even more crisp image with deeper black levels and more eye-catching colors. OLED displays also have a lower response rate than LCD displays, which makes the iPad Pro display feel even smoother. And yes, I can literally notice when scrolling or switching app pages or just looking at the animations on the iPad Pro, how much more smooth this display looks and feels even over the MacBook Pro's display. The only advantage you get with the MacBook Pro display is, yeah, it is larger, 1.2 inches, so it does create a less cramped workspace for using multiple applications, and its aspect ratio, ironically enough, is usually the better choice when watching most video formats. Still, the OLED iPad Pro display, it's a huge improvement over the MacBook Pro's display, and it is clearly the more advanced display on every level. So much so that I don't know what Apple is waiting for. Just ship these great OLED displays on the MacBook Pro already. I'm tired of waiting. Oh, and if the advantage wasn't even more clear, and if there's one more reason you want to give an advantage to the iPad Pro, well, it's display as a touch display, while the MacBook Pro doesn't and maybe never will. And it is crazy to think that even with the iPad Pro being thinner, it is packing all of this hardware into its design. Surely Apple must have cut back somewhere. I mean, a thinner design can't be good for its speakers, right? Well, on multiple listening sessions, the iPad Pro speakers still blow me away with how much volume, bass, and clarity Apple is pumping out of these relatively tiny tablet speakers. Despite that, this is perhaps one area where even Apple Magic can't defy the laws of physics, because the 6-speaker system in the MacBook Pro just blows this thing out of the water. The thicker bottom of the MacBook Pro gives so much extra room for these speakers to breathe, and they get even louder and clearer than the speakers on the iPad Pro. And by a lot, especially in the bass department. These deliver such a deep, satisfying thump thanks to the force-canceling woofers. And while the iPad Pro may sound good when you're lounging on the couch, the MacBook Pro speakers can legitimately fill a room with sound and could go toe-to-toe against some dedicated Bluetooth speakers. Now, when you look at the MacBook Pro, you can't help but feel like something is missing from this laptop. It's something you might not consider a feature at first, but if you look at the back of both of these devices, you'll realize there's no camera on the back of the MacBook Pro. Yes, the iPad Pro does have a rear-facing 12-megapixel camera, and strangely enough, it's actually reverted to a one-camera system this year, losing out on its secondary ultra-wide-angle camera that came with the previous iPad Pro. The interesting thing, though, is that the front cameras on both of these devices are practically the same now. I mean, number one, the iPad Pro switched the camera to the landscape orientation, so it's kind of sitting in the same spot as the MacBook Pros when you have it propped up on the keyboard. And now the MacBook Pro also gets the same center stage webcam as the iPad Pro. So both of these devices can track your movements when you're moving around, and admittedly, it is a really cool effect. And both webcams even appear to have a similar video quality. So while the front cameras are pretty much the same, at the end of the day, 2 cameras are better than one. I think that's what my mom used to say. And that means by default, I have to give this one to the iPad Pro. Okay, what about performance? Surely a big, bulkier, full-fledged laptop in 2024 is going to get you more performance than what you can get out of this thin, lightweight tablet that your nephew uses at the dinner table to watch Skibbity Toilet. Yeah, I know what Skibbity Toilet is. I'm not that old. Well, technically speaking, that isn't the case here because yes, this super slimmed down, thinner than an iPad has the same exact M4 chip as the one found in the M4 MacBook Pro, meaning that the responsiveness of the operating system, the snappiness in opening apps, and even the performance from artificial benchmarks is pretty much exactly the same on both machines. Now, yeah, there is one difference that does give the MacBook Pro an edge in sustained performance, and that is because the MacBook Pro is bigger, it does allow Apple to add a dedicated cooling fan to it, which can cool off the M4 chip and reduce throttling during higher sustained workloads. However, for most people, I doubt they would be able to tell the performance difference between these machines. And considering most apps and software are written differently for both of these products, it's kind of hard to do an apples to apples test against both machines, no pun intended. So even though yes, the MacBook Pro will probably net you a slight performance advantage because of the fan, let's for now, for argument's sake, say because they both use the same chip, therefore, they both have the same performance. All right, big one here is operating system. I don't like doing this topic that much anymore because I feel like it's always a rehash of the same things. So yes, the iPad Pro over the years has gotten a lot more complicated. You can do split screen multitasking. You can even now do windowed multitasking in Apple's new Stage Manager mode, but it's a lot more limited than what you can get on the Mac, which does offer fully true multitasking without any sort of app limitations. I believe like the most windows you can have open on an iPad Pro is like 4 at the same time. But this is a pretty good multitasking system for screens this small. So it's not like you're really gonna wanna have that many apps open at once at the same time anyway, and it's not that big of a hassle to pop into different workspaces when you are using the Stage Manager feature. But macOS just gives you a lot more freedom in its multitasking system, and even if you like the system that Apple has here with the iPad Pro with Stage Manager, of course you can get that same feature right on macOS. Now, there's a file system in macOS, it has a desktop operating system, there's a lot more freedom here to use macOS. And I don't want to boil it down going comparison against comparison and conflate this whole thing to operating system preferences because for some people, they're gonna prefer what you can do on the iPad Pro because it's technically a more simple setup for the operating system, right? You have a grid of apps, you press them, it works a lot like your iPhone. And then if you want to get more complex with it, if you want to introduce multitasking, if you want to go into the Files app and kind of have like a little mini file system, if you want to run like a bunch of multitasking apps, you can do that. You even have a lot of professional applications on the iPad now, like Final Cut Pro and Logic that weren't there a few years ago. So this thing is becoming more pro and more capable day by day, but it still has all the hangups of traditional iPad OS. And I get that some users might prefer that. I get that it's not necessarily a win-win for everyone to switch to macOS, but at the end of the day, my argument always boils down to, I can do more on macOS. I can do a lot more on macOS than I can on my iPad Pro. There's a lot more freedom here. And I think the best argument I can have as to which operating system wins out is the iPad, the operating system, iPad OS, is developed on macOS. You can code on macOS, you can develop a whole operating system for the iPad and make all your apps there, and you can't do the same on iPad. You can't develop macOS apps on the iPad. That's basically my winning argument for why macOS is the superior operating system, and that doesn't even go to mention a lot of the other features you have with macOS now, including new features that were just added, like window tiling and easier management there. So if you're gonna ask me which operating system wins, I give it to macOS. But I understand that if this category, you're like, well, I prefer the simplicity of iPad, then you can kind of ignore it. But let's be honest, macOS is the winner here. Okay, the big reveal. Tally it up. Carry the one, and do we have a tie? Oh, there we go again. Greg once again getting accused of playing it safe to the crowd, not crowning a winner, playing both sides of the aisle. I thought this was a YouTube channel, not some sort of political campaign. All right, I'll admit it. I wasn't planning for this to end in a tie, and despite the tie, I was prepared to crown the iPad Pro as the de facto winner of this entire video due to a massive...
And you know what else is massive?
Massive hardware improvement it now has over the MacBook Pro. But then I had to go back and look at the pricing. I know, it's easy to look at the Apple Store pricing and easily conclude that the iPad Pro packs in a better value with a cheaper $1,300 starting price for the 13-inch model, which stacks up so similarly in its use cases against the 14-inch MacBook Pro. However, we have to remember that the starting configuration of the iPad Pro only starts at 256 gigabytes of storage, while the 14-inch MacBook Pro comes with 512 gigabytes of storage. So it's only fair we spec them at the same storage tiers. And there you have it. A full-featured premium iPad Pro is $100 cheaper than the MacBook Pro. We have our winner. Congratulations to the iPad Pro taking the crown in this fair challenge. Mwah! For the first time since 2017. Bravo, iPad Pro. Bravo! Take a bow. Take a bow. You did it. You won. You won. Wait a minute. I left something out. Yes, it's hard to miss that this year Apple gave a major boost to the starting value of the MacBook Pro, starting it now with 16 gigabytes of memory. Now, while the iPad Pro doesn't display its memory on the configuration page, a deep dive into the tech specs will reveal two things. First of all, storage options below 1 terabyte come with 8 gigabytes of memory, meaning that if you want the same 16 gigabytes of memory as a MacBook Pro, you have to choose the 1 or 2 terabyte option. Choosing that option reveals something pretty startling as well, and that is the iPad Pro, when matched spec for spec against an equally configured 1 terabyte MacBook Pro, is $100 more expensive than the MacBook. Historically, that is a major departure from iPad Pro pricing. This is the first time that an iPad Pro, pound for pound, spec for spec, has ever been more expensive than a MacBook Pro. And that's without adding on the optional $350 Magic Keyboard or the optional Apple Pencil that we didn't even really talk about in today's video. Yeah, if you're an artist, you get an Apple Pencil, you could draw on the iPad Pro. What? Yeah, you get that point already, right? The iPad Pro, if you add on both of these accessories, easily outprices the MacBook. It sends this iPad into the stratosphere in terms of pricing. Secondly, even if we get rid of the accessories and we disregard the fact that the storage tiers aren't the same or the memory tiers aren't the same, maybe you can argue you don't need that on an iPad Pro. While another look at this tech spec page brings up an inconvenient truth, and that is that the base iPad Pros also ship with a weaker M4 chip, which loses out on one high-performance CPU core. That completely changes the tie I gave these in the performance round category because I was comparing my own 1TB iPad Pro against the base model M4 MacBook Pro. And I've been grading the iPad Pro on a curve this entire video because I didn't even mention battery life. The MacBook Pro battery life has been getting better and better. The M4 version can now get up to 24 hours of battery life, while the iPad Pro is still stuck at its rating of 10 hours of battery life. It is impossible to ignore this stark and drastic value difference, meaning that yes, for most people, the MacBook Pro is the more practical and probably the better overall choice. I can't believe that this thing winds up being cheaper than the iPad Pro. It is crazy how far Apple has taken iPad Pro pricing. Now, yes, I acknowledge that even though I think there is a clear winner this year, maybe more than ever before, there are still reasons to pick up an iPad Pro. In my mind, it is the most cutting-edge piece of hardware that Apple sells, and yeah, I guess that does come at a literal price this year. It is also a better product for people that want a lighter weight, more portable setup, people that want to use a tablet, people that want a simpler operating system that works more like their phone, and for users that need a touchscreen or the various Pro-related inputs for tasks that you might do on your iPad Pro. No matter how good this MacBook Pro is, it's not going to be a great device if you want to draw directly on the screen. I get that. So at the end of the day, we still partially get a politician's response, but this time more realistically grounded. But all right, I had my say. Now it's your turn. What do you think is the better computer? Which one would you choose in the new year? And which one do you think should take the winning spot? As always, if you like this video and you found it helpful, please give me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.